Imagine if I told you that deep in the jungles of Cambodia, 1,000 years ago, an ancient civilization built something so massive, so impossible, that it makes modern construction projects look like children's toys. What if I told you they moved 6 million tons of stone through dense tropical rainforest without trucks, cranes, or machinery, and somehow assembled it into over 1,000 temples? And what if I told you this entire complex is so large that it covers more ground than the island of Manhattan, built entirely by hand in a jungle that floods 6 months every year? You'd think I was making this up, wouldn't you? Well, tonight you're about to discover the most impossible construction project in human history, one that shouldn't exist, according to every rule of engineering and logistics. Welcome back to the Sleepy Structures, where we explore the world's most magnificent buildings through the gentle lens of history, one story at a time. Tonight, we journey to the jungles of Cambodia, to a temple complex so vast, so mathematically perfect, that when European explorers first stumbled upon it in 1860, they refused to believe that local people could have built it. This is the story of Angkor Wat, not just a temple, but an entire civilization's masterpiece as carved from stone in conditions that would defeat modern construction crews. So settle in, dim the lights, and prepare to witness human ambition on a scale that defies comprehension. Let me start with a simple question. How many stones do you think it takes to build a house? Maybe a few thousand, perhaps 10,000, for a really big house. Now multiply that by 1,000, and you're still not even close to understanding what we're talking about. The builders of Angkor Wat used over 6 million tons of sandstone blocks, each one cut by hand, transported through jungle and fitted with precision. That modern engineers study to understand how it's possible. But here's where it gets truly insane. This wasn't just one building. This was over 1,000 temples, built across 4 centuries in the middle of a jungle that turns into a lake every monsoon season. Think about that for a moment. 1,000 temples in a place where it floods 6 months out of every year. How do you even start such an impossible project? The main temple alone, Angkor Wat proper, covers 500 acres. That's bigger than the entire Vatican City, and it's just one temple in a complex that stretches for hundreds of square miles. To put this in perspective, if you walked around the outer wall of Angkor Wat, it would take you over an hour just to complete one lap. Of a single building, the central tower rises 213 feet above ground. That's taller than a 20-story skyscraper built entirely from stone blocks, without any steel reinforcement or modern structural support. Now here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. The entire complex required coordination of over 1 million workers, not just for a few years, but for multiple generations. Some families worked on this project for their entire lives. Imagine trying to manage 1 million people today with modern communication, project management software, and transportation systems. These ancient builders did it with nothing but human organization and somehow maintained quality control standards that modern construction struggles to achieve. The stone carving alone should have been impossible. The walls of Angkor Wat contain over 3,000 individual carved figures called apsaras, celestial dancing women. Each apsara is unique. No two are exactly alike, yet all maintain the same artistic style and quality standards across decades of carving. But that's not even the most impressive part. The narrative relief panels cover over 13,000 square feet of wall space. That's like carving detailed stories across 3 football fields of solid stone. These aren't simple decorations. These are intricate scenes from Hindu epics with thousands of characters, battles involving armies, gods and demons, all carved with detail. So fine you need magnifying glasses to appreciate the craftsmanship, the logistics of coordinating thousands of stone carvers to create such consistency across such vast surfaces for such extended periods defies modern understanding of project management. And remember, all of this happened in a jungle where temperatures reach over 100 degrees, with humidity so high that metal tools rust within days. During monsoon season, the entire construction site becomes a swamp, yet work continued, year after year, decade after decade, for over 400 years. The mathematical precision they achieved borders on supernatural. The temple is aligned to celestial movements with accuracy that requires advanced astronomical knowledge. The main causeway leading to the temple points exactly toward the spring equinox sunrise. This wasn't luck. This was calculated, with instruments we can barely imagine. Even more remarkable, the proportions of every element follow mathematical ratios that create perfect visual harmony. The height of towers, the width of courtyards, the spacing of columns, all calculated to ratios that please the human eye. Modern architects study these proportions to understand principles of visual balance that somehow these builders knew instinctively. The foundation work presents another impossibility. How do you create stable foundations in jungle soil that turns to mud 6 months every year? They develop techniques for deep foundation systems using layered stone and drainage methods that kept the massive structures perfectly stable for over 1,000 years. Some of these buildings have survived earthquakes, tropical storms, centuries of flooding, and the slow assault of jungle vegetation attempting to reclaim what humans built. The scale of human effort required for this achievement staggers the imagination. If you worked 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would take you over 1,500 years just to move the stones from quarry to construction site. Yet somehow, these ancient builders accomplished this feat while simultaneously running an empire, growing food, raising families, and maintaining one of the largest cities in the pre-industrial world. This wasn't just construction. This was human civilization operating at peak capacity, achieving something that pushes the boundaries of what we believe possible with primitive technology. But the most mind-bending aspect of this entire story is still to come, because building these temples was just the beginning of an engineering challenge that makes modern projects look simple by comparison. In 1113 CE, King Suryavarman VII of the mighty Khmer Empire made a decision that would consume the next 37 years of his civilization. He would build the ultimate temple to the Hindu god Vishnu in the heart of Cambodia's jungle, in the heart of Cambodia, where ancient trees grow tall enough to block out the sun, where the air hangs thick with moisture and mystery. The Khmer builders faced their greatest enemy, nature itself. Building Angkor Wat wasn't like constructing on open plains or desert landscapes. This was war against one of Earth's most hostile environments. The jungle fought back at every step. Vines thick as human arms wrapped around scaffolding. Trees grew through partially completed walls. If work stopped for even a few months, root systems powerful enough to crack stone foundations began their assault. Before construction even finished, the builders raced against nature's relentless reclamation efforts. But here's what makes this almost impossible to comprehend. How do you clear enough jungle to build something the size of a small city without destroying the water systems you desperately need? The monsoon rains that flood the region 6 months every year weren't just an obstacle, they were essential for the hydraulic engineering that made construction possible. Clear too much forest, and you lose the natural water management systems that control flooding. Leave too much, and you can't transport massive stone blocks through dense vegetation. The builders developed selective clearing techniques that maintained critical drainage patterns while creating corridors wide enough for elephant teams, pulling multi-ton stones. Every tree removal was carefully calculated to preserve the delicate water balance that kept construction sites from becoming permanent swamps. Working in such humidity created problems modern builders never have to consider. Metal tools rusted within days of use, wooden scaffolding rotted before projects completed, stone surfaces became slippery with constant moisture, making precision carving extremely dangerous. One slip of a chisel could ruin months of detailed work. The heat and humidity exhausted workers. Within hours, labour schedules had to account for the physical limitations of human endurance in tropical conditions. Diseases thrived in the jungle environment. Malaria, dengue fever, and parasitic infections constantly threatened the massive workforce. Medical knowledge of the time could do little against tropical illnesses. Wildlife presented constant dangers: venomous snakes, aggressive primates, dangerous insects. All shared the construction site, with human workers. Tigers and leopards stalked the forest, making night work virtually impossible. Construction schedules were limited to daylight hours, when visibility provided some protection. The monsoon season brought its own set of challenges. For 6 months, rainfall could exceed 200 inches, turning solid ground into impassable mud. During these months, heavy construction came to a standstill, but delicate work, like stone carving, could continue under temporary shelters. The flooding wasn't just surface water. The entire landscape became a network of interconnected lakes. Transportation routes had to be completely redesigned during monsoon season. Stone blocks that took weeks to transport by land during dry season could be floated on barges and rafts. During the floods, this seasonal transformation required 2 completely different construction strategies: dry season for heavy lifting and placement, wet season for detailed finishing work. The builders learned to work with these natural cycles rather than fight them. Planning construction sequences around predictable seasonal changes. Drainage systems built into the temples weren't just for long-term water management, they were essential for construction survival, preventing work sites from becoming permanent lakes. Storage of materials required constant vigilance. Stone blocks, left exposed to moisture, could develop cracks from thermal expansion. During temperature changes, wooden tools and equipment needed daily maintenance to prevent decay. In the humid environment, the logistics of tool replacement and repair added enormous complexity to project management. Yet despite all these environmental challenges, work continued, generation after generation. Each monsoon season, workers returned to find their progress partially claimed by jungle growth. Each dry season, they cleared away nature's advances and resumed building in this endless cycle of human determination against natural reclamation. The fact that anything survived this battle is remarkable. The fact that 1,000 temples rose from this jungle and still stand today is nothing short of miraculous. But winning the war against the jungle was only the first of many impossible challenges. The builders still faced the monumental task of moving mountains of stone. Conquering the jungle was only half the battle. The other half lay 25 miles away in the mountains of Kulen, where the raw material for this impossible dream waited to be awakened. But how do you move mountains? One stone at a time, through impenetrable forest, high in the Kulen Mountains, where morning mist clings to ancient stone faces, where the earth holds secrets formed over millions of years. The Khmer discovered nature's perfect building material, waiting in silent quarries, sandstone, not the pristine white marble of distant palaces, but something far more practical, far more forgiving. For the monumental task ahead, this wasn't ordinary stone. Kulin sandstone possessed unique qualities that made it ideal for jungle construction. It could withstand centuries of monsoon rains without dissolving. Like limestone would, the grain structure allowed for intricate carving while maintaining strength. Under enormous weight, its natural colour ranged from pale grey to warm pink, creating visual variety without compromising structural integrity. But here's the challenge. That should have stopped. This project before it started, these quarries lay 25 miles from the construction site through some of the densest, most difficult terrain. In Southeast Asia, how do you transport 6 million tons of stone across such distance through jungle valleys, swollen rivers, and mountainous terrain, using only human power and animal strength? The quarrying operation itself represented an engineering marvel. Master stoneworkers studied the mountain faces for months before making the first cut, identifying the precise locations where perfect blocks could be extracted. Without internal flaws, the extraction technique required extraordinary skill, using wooden wedges soaked overnight in water to create controlled fractures along natural grain lines. Each block had to split exactly where intended. One miscalculation and months of work would shatter uselessly. Quality control at the quarry sites reached obsessive levels. Every extracted block underwent multiple inspections. For color consistency, structural soundness, and workability, rejected stones were set aside. For lesser construction projects, only the finest specimens met the impossible standards required for Angkor Wat. The scale of quarrying staggers the imagination. To extract 6 million tons of usable stone required removing nearly twice that amount of surrounding rock and overburden. Entire mountainsides were systematically carved away, block by block, year after year, for decades. The landscape itself was reshaped by human determination. But quarrying the stone was only the beginning. The real nightmare lay in transportation. How do you move individual blocks weighing up to 3,000 pounds down treacherous mountain paths? The Khmer developed innovative solutions for each stage of this logistical challenge. Specially designed sleds with curved runners could navigate steep mountain slopes while protecting the precious cargo. Teams of elephants, trained specifically for heavy lifting, worked in coordination to lower massive blocks down cliff faces using rope and pulley systems that multiplied their natural strength. The mountain transportation required building temporary roads through previously impassable terrain, stone foundations, wooden bridges, drainage systems, all constructed just to move building materials. Once blocks reached the base of the mountains, the real challenge began. River transportation during dry season required specially built rafts capable of supporting multi-ton loads without capsizing. During monsoon floods, the same rivers became highways. Stone blocks that took weeks to transport by land could float downstream in days. But water transportation brought its own dangers. Rapids could destroy months of work in seconds. Navigation required skilled river pilots who knew every rock, every dangerous current. The logistics of coordination between quarry sites, transportation routes, and construction schedules required unprecedented organizational skills. Materials had to arrive at precisely the right time in exactly the right sequence. Storage areas near construction sites became vast outdoor warehouses organized by stone type, size specifications, and intended use. In the final structure, weather protection for stored materials required covered pavilions with proper ventilation to prevent moisture damage. That could ruin months of quarrying work. The human cost of this stone operation was enormous. Thousands of workers spent their entire lives in quarries and transport. Many never lived to see the completed temples they helped make possible. Yet somehow, this impossible operation continued for decades, delivering the raw materials for humanity's most ambitious construction project, one carefully extracted block at a time. But moving the stone was just the foundation of an even greater challenge. How do you transform these massive blocks into soaring temple towers that seem to defy the very laws of physics, with millions of tons of sandstone finally reaching the construction site? The builders faced their ultimate test. How do you stack stone blocks into towers that rise over 200 feet into the sky without a single piece of steel or modern structural support in the center of Angkor Wat, where earth meets heaven, where human ambition challenges the very sky? The Khmer builders attempted something that had never been done at such massive scale. They would build towers so tall and perfectly proportioned that they would appear to float above the jungle canopy like mountains crafted by gods rather than mortal hands. The central tower, rising 213 feet above ground, represented more than architectural achievement. It was a statement that human ingenuity could reach toward the divine. But here's what makes this accomplishment almost impossible to believe. These towers were built using a construction technique called corbelling, where each level projects slightly inward from the level below. Imagine stacking blocks like an inverted pyramid, each layer smaller than the one beneath, until you reach a perfect point, 200 feet above the ground. This technique requires mathematical precision that pushes the limits of structural engineering. One miscalculation in weight distribution, and the entire tower collapses catastrophically. The Khmer architects somehow calculated the exact center of gravity for each level, ensuring that the structure remained perfectly balanced despite its impossible height. The foundation system for these towering structures extended deep underground. Massive stone blocks, some weighing over 5,000 pounds, were buried beneath each tower base. These foundation blocks were fitted together with the same precision as the visible architecture, creating underground chambers that distributed the enormous weight across broad areas of jungle soil. But the real engineering genius lay in the tower construction sequence itself. How do you lift multi-ton stone blocks to heights exceeding 20 stories using only human power? The solution required innovation at every level. Spiral ramps were built around each rising tower, creating continuous pathways for workers and materials to reach any height. These ramps weren't simple earthen mounds. They were engineered structures with stone foundations, wooden reinforcements, and precise gradients that allowed elephant teams to pull heavy loads to incredible heights. The lifting mechanisms developed for tower construction combined multiple technologies into integrated systems. Compound pulley arrangements multiplied human lifting force, while wooden cranes provided mechanical advantage. Teams of workers, stationed at different levels, passed stones upward in carefully choreographed human chains that functioned like living conveyor belts, moving materials from ground to sky. The precision required for stone placement at such heights pushed human skill to absolute limits. Each block had to fit perfectly into position. On the first attempt, there was no room for trial and error. At 200 feet above ground, with primitive lifting equipment, dropping a stone could kill workers below and destroy months of delicate construction. Quality control inspections happened at every level. Master craftsmen climbed the precarious scaffolding to examine each placed stone using specialized tools that detected variations invisible to untrained eyes. The corbelling technique required understanding of advanced physics. Each projecting level created stress concentrations that had to be calculated and compensated for. In the overall design, the tower's internal structure contained hidden chambers and passages that served both religious and structural purposes. These hollow spaces reduced overall weight while maintaining architectural integrity. Ventilation systems built into the tower walls prevented moisture buildup that could weaken the stone joints over centuries of monsoon exposure. The acoustic properties of each tower were carefully calculated to amplify chanted prayers and ritual music, creating sound effects that enhanced the spiritual experience. Temperature control became critical during construction. Sandstone expands and contracts with heat and cold. Work schedules were planned around optimal thermal conditions. The final phase of tower construction required the most skilled craftsmen. The topmost stones had to be shaped and positioned with absolute precision. The crowning elements of each tower were carved into lotus bud shapes, symbolizing spiritual enlightenment. These delicate finials required months of detailed stone carving at dangerous heights. When the last stone was finally positioned on the central tower, the temporary ramps and scaffolding were carefully dismantled, revealing the completed architectural miracle. The 5 towers of Angkor Wat, arranged in perfect and geometric harmony, created a silhouette that seemed to grow from the earth itself, yet reach toward the heavens above. These towering achievements stood as proof that human determination, combined with engineering genius, could overcome every limitation of primitive technology. But even these soaring architectural marvels were just part of a larger engineering triumph that would revolutionize how civilizations managed their most precious resource. While the soaring towers captured the imagination of every visitor, the true genius of Angkor lay hidden beneath the surface in an engineering achievement that modern hydraulic experts still struggle to comprehend. How do you control the devastating power of seasonal floods and transform them into the lifeblood of your construction project? Beneath the magnificent temples, beyond the carved reliefs and towering spires, flows the secret heartbeat of Khmer civilization, a network of canals, reservoirs and waterways that turned chaos into order, flood into fortune. The monsoon rains that could have destroyed this monumental project instead became its salvation through hydraulic engineering so sophisticated that it functioned for over 8 centuries without major repairs. But imagine the challenge. For just a moment, every year for 6 months, your construction site disappears beneath millions of gallons of rushing floodwater. How do you not just survive, but actually benefit from such natural violence? The first step was the most backbreaking, digging massive reservoirs by hand, using nothing but simple bronze tools, wooden shovels, and human muscle. The Westbury alone required moving over 50 million tons of earth and rock. That's like digging out a hole the size of 500 football fields 20 feet deep. Teams of workers, organized into chains, passed baskets of dirt from digger to digger until the excavated soil reached the embankment areas where it was carefully packed and shaped. The digging started during dry season. When the ground was hard, bronze picks loosened the compacted earth, while wooden shovels scooped it into woven baskets. Each basket held about 40 pounds of dirt and rocks. A single worker could move roughly 200 baskets per day. That's 8,000 pounds of earth moved by one person in a single day. Multiply that by thousands of workers, labouring for months, and you begin to understand how they moved. Mountains of earth, without modern machinery, the excavation had to follow precise depth measurements. Too shallow and the reservoir wouldn't hold enough water. Too deep and they'd hit underground springs that would make the reservoir unusable. Master engineers used simple but effective water-level devices, wooden frames with stretched strings and hanging weights to ensure the bottom was perfectly flat. As the giant holes grew deeper, the challenge became getting the dirt out. Workers built wooden ramps that spiraled up the reservoir walls. These ramps had to be strong enough to support hundreds of workers carrying heavy baskets, yet easy to move. As the excavation changed shape, the embankments around each reservoir required even more precision. These earthen walls had to hold back millions of gallons of water pressure without bursting. The soil for embankments came from the excavation, but not just any dirt. Workers sorted the earth, clay for watertight sealing, sand for drainage, rocks for structural strength. Each layer of embankment was built like a sandwich, clay on the water side to prevent leaking, rock fill in the middle for structural strength, packed earth on the outside for stability. Workers compacted each layer by walking on it, hundreds of people tramping back and forth until the earth became hard as concrete. The stone lining for the most important channels required different techniques. Flat stones were selected at the quarries for smooth water flow. Installing these stone linings meant working in muddy, water-filled trenches. Workers had to fit each stone perfectly. While standing waist-deep in flowing water, the gaps between stones were sealed with a mixture of clay, crushed shells, and tree resin. This natural cement hardened underwater, creating waterproof joints for the canal gradients. The builders used ingenious surveying methods. They filled long wooden tubes with water and used the water level to measure height differences. Over great distances, teams of surveyors carried these water tubes along proposed canal routes, marking elevation changes with wooden stakes. Every few hundred feet, the gradient had to be just right. Too steep and water would flow too fast, washing away the banks. Too gentle and water would barely move, allowing stagnation. They aimed for a slope of about 1 foot for every 1,000 feet of canal length. This required incredible precision over distances of many miles. Canal construction started from both ends. Teams worked toward each other, using the survey stakes as guides. When the two sections finally met, they had to connect perfectly. Any height difference would create rapids or standing water. The spillways that controlled water flow between different levels were carved from single pieces of stone shaped like giant steps. These stone spillways had to be positioned exactly right. Too high and water wouldn't flow properly. Too low and floods would overwhelm the downstream channels. Bridge construction across the waterways required building temporary dams to divert water while workers laid foundation stones. The bridge foundations were built like underwater pyramids, large stones at the bottom, smaller stones stacked layer by layer until they reached above water level. Workers used wooden diving bells, simple air-filled boxes that allowed them to work underwater for short periods. While building bridge foundations, the arch construction required wooden frameworks called centering that supported the stones until the keystone locked everything in place. Maintenance systems were built into the design from the start. Sluice gates could drain sections for cleaning and repair without stopping The entire water flow, sediment traps, were built at key locations where flowing water naturally slowed down, allowing sand and mud to settle out. These traps could be cleaned periodically, keeping the main channels clear for navigation and preventing the build-up that would clog the entire system. The construction of this water network took almost as long as building the temples, but without it, the temple construction would have been completely impossible. This mastery over water enabled the Khmer to sustain construction for nearly 4 centuries, creating the foundation for artistic achievements that would astonish the world. But even with these engineering marvels supporting the project, the builders still faced their most intricate challenge, transforming blank stone walls into galleries of stories that would take lifetimes to complete. With the structural engineering complete and the water systems functioning, the builders faced their final challenge. How do you coordinate thousands of artists to carve consistent stories across miles of stone walls without any of them ever seeing the finished result? The decorative phase of Angkor Wat construction began with an impossible assignment: cover 13,000 square feet of wall space with intricate narrative scenes from Hindu mythology. To put this in perspective, that's equivalent to carving detailed stories across 3 football fields of solid sandstone, every figure unique, every scene perfectly composed. The scale alone should have made consistent quality impossible, yet somehow the finished galleries display artistic unity that suggests a single master's hand guided every chisel stroke. The project required over 3,000 individual Apsara figures, celestial dancing women, each one carved with unique facial features, different jewellery, distinct hand positions, individual costume details. No 2 Apsaras are exactly identical, yet all maintain the same artistic style, the same proportional standards, the same level of technical excellence. The coordination challenge boggled the mind. How do you ensure that a carver working on the eastern wall maintains consistency with artists hundreds of yards away on the western side? The solution required revolutionary artistic management techniques. Master sculptors created detailed drawings on palm leaf manuscripts showing exact proportions, facial expressions, costume patterns. These pattern books were distributed to carving teams. Throughout the complex, every figure type had its own template with precise measurements and style guidelines. Apprentice training programs ensured technique consistency. Young carvers spent years learning specific specialties. Some focused exclusively on facial features, others mastered jewellery and ornaments. The most skilled artists specialised in hands. The most challenging aspect of figure carving, hand positions, in classical dance, convey specific meanings, requiring both anatomical accuracy and cultural knowledge. Quality control inspections happened at multiple stages: rough carving, detail work, final polishing. Each phase required approval from master supervisors before proceeding. Rejected carvings were completely removed and started over. No matter how many weeks of meticulous work had been invested, standards never wavered. Throughout the decades of artistic production, the narrative reliefs presented even greater coordination challenges. Epic battle scenes involving hundreds of individual warriors had to flow seamlessly from panel to panel. The Battle of Kurukshetra from the Mahabharata stretches across multiple gallery sections. Each panel shows different moments in the same battle, creating a stone motion picture of mythological warfare. Individual carvers working on battle scenes had to understand not just their own panel, but how their section connected to adjacent storylines. The artistic directors used sophisticated planning methods. Clay models showed how figures would interact across panel boundaries, wooden mock-ups of entire wall sections allowed supervisors to visualize the complete composition before carving began on stone. Tool-making for such detailed work became an art form. Specialized chisels were forged for different carving tasks. Fine detail work required instruments, almost like surgical tools. The carving sequence followed strict protocols, rough shaping first to establish basic proportions, then intermediate detail development, finally surface, finishing and polishing. Each stage required different skill levels. Experienced carvers did the initial proportional work, master artists added facial expressions, apprentices handled background elements. Working conditions in the tropical climate created constant challenges. Stone dust mixed with humidity created respiratory problems. For the carvers, protective measures included wet cloths over nose and mouth, regular breaks in shaded areas, and rotation systems that prevented extended exposure to stone particles. Lighting conditions affected carving quality. Work could only proceed during optimal natural light hours. Too early or late, and shadows obscured. Fine detail work, scaffolding systems for high wall sections required constant adjustment and maintenance. Bamboo platforms had to support multiple carvers, plus their tools and stone debris. The polishing phase required different techniques for various surface types. Flat backgrounds received smooth, mirror-like finishes, while textured areas maintained rougher surfaces for contrast. Specialized polishing stones were imported from distant regions, different grades for different finishing effects. The finest polish used stones from specific mountain locations. Documentation systems tracked progress across the entire artistic program. Completion records showed which sections were finished, which needed revision, which required additional work. The timeline for completing all decorative work extended over 15 years. Multiple generations of carvers contributed to the finished galleries. Artistic styles evolved slightly over the decades, but remained remarkably consistent. Thanks to rigorous training and quality control, the final artistic achievement represented more than decoration. These carved galleries transformed structural engineering into visual poetry that continues to inspire artists 8 centuries later. By 1150 CE, the last chisel stroke was completed, the last surface polished to perfection. Angkor Wat stood as proof that human artistic vision could match engineering ambition, but this magnificent achievement still required its final elements to become the eternal monument we marvel at today. By 1150 CE, after 37 years of unprecedented construction, the final carved relief was completed, the last stone perfectly positioned. King Suryavarman VII's impossible vision had become magnificent reality. But how does such an achievement survive the test of time? And what do modern experts think of this ancient masterpiece? On a morning in 1150 CE, the scaffolding came down for the final time. The construction camps that had housed 1 million workers over 4 decades began to empty. The statistical achievement defied comprehension. 1 million craftsmen had labored for 37 years, moving 6 million tons of sandstone from quarries to temples, creating over 1,000 individual structures. The financial investment consumed the wealth of the entire Khmer Empire for nearly 4 decades, making it proportionally the most expensive construction project in human history. But numbers cannot capture the true legacy of this extraordinary accomplishment. Angkor Wat established new standards of precision that influenced architecture across Southeast Asia for centuries to come. The hydraulic engineering developed for construction continued functioning long after completion, supporting agricultural systems that fed millions of people for over 600 years. Today, modern engineering experts express amazement at construction techniques they struggle to understand. Dr. Michael Freeman, leading Angkor researcher, states that some methods used by Khmer builders remain mysteries. Despite decades of study, Professor John Stubbs from the World Monuments Fund describes Angkor Wat as the most sophisticated pre-industrial construction ever documented, combining structural engineering, hydraulic mastery, and artistic achievement at unprecedented scale. UNESCO engineers who oversee preservation consistently note that original construction quality exceeds modern restoration work. Despite having superior tools and materials, the precision achieved in stone cutting continues to baffle contemporary craftsmen. Joints between blocks remain so tight that thin metal probes cannot penetrate them. After 870 years, modern surveying equipment confirms that the temple alignment with astronomical events achieves accuracy that requires advanced mathematical knowledge. Computer analysis of the proportional systems reveals geometric relationships based on sophisticated understanding of golden ratio principles and harmonic progressions. Today, over 2 million visitors annually journey to Angkor Wat, each one witnessing the same impossible perfection that astonished medieval travelers. Sunrise at Angkor Wat, when the temple silhouette reflects perfectly in the surrounding moats, remains one of the most photographed architectural moments in the world. Conservation efforts using modern technology work to preserve original craftsmanship for future generations. Laser cleaning systems remove centuries of biological growth without damaging ancient stone surfaces. Digital documentation creates precise records of every architectural element, ensuring that restoration work maintains historical accuracy. International teams of archaeologists continue discovering new construction techniques, hidden chambers, and engineering solutions. Ground-penetrating radar reveals foundation systems that extend much deeper than previously understood. The temple complex attracts scholars from every field. Hydraulic engineers study water management, structural engineers analyze load distribution, art historians document carving techniques. Modern construction projects worldwide reference Angkor methods. When facing similar challenges, the temple builders' solutions remain relevant today. Tourism revenue from Angkor visits supports local communities that descended from original construction workers, creating economic continuity across centuries. Educational programs bring the construction story to global audiences through digital reconstructions and interactive exhibits. The temple's influence on architectural education continues growing. Engineering schools use Angkor Wat as case studies in sustainable construction. Climate change poses new threats to the ancient structures. Rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns stress stone and mortar systems. Preservation teams adapt ancient maintenance techniques with modern materials to protect the monuments for future generations. As we reach the end of this extraordinary story, we've witnessed human achievement on a scale that challenges every assumption about ancient capabilities in an age without modern machinery, without computers, without steel or concrete. The Khmer builders created something so magnificent that it continues to inspire wonder. Nearly 900 years later, Angkor Wat stands today, as it has for centuries, a testament to the power of human vision combined with unwavering determination and collective effort, every sunrise illuminates the same perfect proportions that first caught morning light in 1150 CE. Every sunset casts shadows through the same precisely carved gallery windows in the quiet of evening, when tourist crowds have departed and the jungle settles into its ancient rhythms. Angkor Wat continues its eternal watch over the Cambodian landscape. Tomorrow will bring new visitors, new discoveries, new challenges for preservation, but the temple that represents humanity's triumph over impossible odds will continue, standing a reminder that when we commit completely to excellence, when we refuse to accept limitations, when we gather the world's greatest talents in service of a shared vision, we can create something that transcends time, something that speaks across centuries about the boundless potential within human imagination and skill. Rest now in the knowledge that such beauty exists, that such precision is possible, that human beings once achieved the impossible in the heart of an ancient jungle. Angkor Wat, eternal, magnificent, and forever, a monument to what we can accomplish when we dream without limits and build without compromise.